At the airport, my son's wife booked me an economy ticket while they sat in business class. She smiled at me and said, "You're used to simple comforts. You'll be fine back there." I stayed quiet, but when boarding began, I didn't walk toward economy. I turned left into first class. What she didn't know was that I owned shares in the airline. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to hear. My name is Margaret Collins, but most people call me Maggie. I'm 63 years old, a retired teacher, and a widow. For most of my life, I lived simply. I raised my son Andrew after my husband passed, and I did everything I could to give him a good life. I wasn't rich, but I gave him love, stability, and the values that I believed mattered most. Andrew grew up to be successful. He built a career, started a business, and married Vanessa. At first, I welcomed her into our family with open arms. She was smart, polished, and full of energy. I wanted so badly to believe she loved Andrew the way I did. But little by little, I began to notice the way she looked at me. Her words were polite, but her tone always carried a sting. I remember one dinner where she leaned across the table and said with a smile, "Maggie, you must be so comfortable in your little house. It suits you, doesn't it?" Andrew laughed nervously and changed the subject, but I felt small in that moment. I told myself not to let it bother me, but those little remarks added up over time. When they invited me on a family trip, I was excited. I thought it would be a chance to spend time with Andrew and with my granddaughter Emily, who is only 8 years old and the light of my life. I pictured us laughing together, enjoying the trip as a family. What I didn't expect was to be humiliated before the journey even began. At the airport, I learned Vanessa had booked their seats in business class while mine was in economy. She made sure to tell me it was because I was used to simple comforts. She said it so casually, like she was doing me a favor. Andrew stayed quiet, as he so often did, and I felt that familiar ache in my chest. Once again, I was treated as if I didn't belong. But what Vanessa didn't know, what she could never imagine, was that years ago I had quietly invested in this airline. I never flaunted it, never talked about it, because I wasn't raised to brag. I believed in saving, in planning, in building a future for my family. And on that day, her insult set the stage for one of the most unforgettable moments of my life. As I stood there at the airport, holding my boarding pass, I felt my cheeks burn. On the small screen at the kiosk, my ticket clearly said economy. Andrew and Vanessa had their shiny business class passes in hand, and the way Vanessa looked at me told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. This was her choice. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and gave me that polite little smile that always carried a sting. "Don't take it the wrong way, Margaret. You're used to simple comforts. You'll be fine back there." Her voice was calm, even sweet on the surface, but the meaning cut deep. I wasn't good enough to sit beside them. I wasn't important enough to share the same space. In her eyes, I was just an old woman tagging along, someone who should be grateful for scraps. Andrew shifted uncomfortably beside her. He looked at me for a moment, then looked down at his phone, pretending to check something important. He didn't defend me. He didn't speak up. That silence hurt almost as much as Vanessa's words. I smiled faintly and nodded, but inside I felt a storm. I wanted to ask her why she thought it was acceptable to humiliate me this way. I wanted to look at my son and remind him of the years I worked 2 jobs just to pay for his schooling, the nights I stayed awake to help him with homework, the sacrifices I made so he could become the man he was. But I swallowed it all. I had learned long ago that some battles are fought quietly, not with shouting. We made our way to security. Vanessa strutted confidently, her designer purse swinging at her side. Andrew followed close behind, and I walked a few steps back, clutching my bag. Other families around us were chatting, laughing, moving as one. I couldn't help but feel the divide between us grow larger with each step. As we reached the gate, Vanessa spoke again, this time loud enough for people around us to hear. "Business class will be good for Andrew. He needs the rest. Margaret, you'll be just fine in economy. You've always said you prefer simple things." Her words made my stomach turn. It wasn't just the dismissal, It was the way she framed it, as if she were doing me a kindness, as if I had no right to expect anything more. I noticed a few people glance at me, then at her, and the humiliation burned deeper. I forced myself to keep my head high, but inside, the pain twisted like a knife. While they stood in the priority boarding line, Vanessa pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of their boarding passes. She leaned toward Andrew and whispered, but I caught the words, "We should post this. People will love it." She was already crafting a story for her friends, a picture-perfect trip that left no room for the woman standing just a few feet away. I sat down in a chair near the gate and pretended to read the small paperback I had packed. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages, not from weakness, but from holding back all the things I wanted to say. Each remark she had made over the years came rushing back to me. The digs at my little house, the way she ignored me in conversations, the way she looked at me like I was a burden, and now, this. But as I sat there, something unexpected happened. The sting began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. Vanessa thought she had won. She thought she had pushed me into a corner where I would stay silent and small. What she didn't know was that I had a card she couldn't play. Years ago, when I was still teaching, I made a decision that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with planning for the future. I invested in this airline. It was a modest investment at first, but over time, it grew. I didn't talk about it because I never wanted my life to be defined by money. But now, sitting there, I realized this was the moment that choice mattered most. I closed the book and looked at my ticket again. Economy class. That was where Vanessa thought I belonged. But soon, when boarding began, everyone at that gate would see a different story. When they called business class passengers to line up, Vanessa grabbed Andrew's arm and pulled him forward. She looked back at me one last time, her smile wide and victorious, as if she had won some invisible battle. I simply nodded and stayed seated. The best part of a quiet victory is that no one sees it coming until it's too late. The announcement came, first-class passengers may now board. My heart steadied. I stood up slowly, gathered my things, and walked calmly to the front. My economy ticket in hand was nothing more than a distraction. The airline knew who I was. I had been on this list many times before. The attendant scanned my pass, smiled warmly, and said, "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Collins. Your seat is ready in first class." In that moment, all the humiliation, all the whispers, all the years of subtle insults began to crumble. Vanessa had no idea what was coming, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small at all. I felt ready. When the boarding announcement for first class came over the loudspeaker, I felt my heart beat faster. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Vanessa was standing in line with Andrew. Her hand looped tightly through his arm, chattering about how comfortable the seats would be, and how much she hated long flights unless she could stretch out properly. She didn't even glance back at me. To her, I was already forgotten, left behind to shuffle through the long economy line. I rose from my seat calmly, gathered my bag, and walked toward the gate. People around me looked at me curiously. To them, I was just another older woman, traveling alone. But the flight attendant at the gate knew me. She smiled warmly, scanned my boarding pass, and her voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Collins. It's wonderful to see you again." The words hit like a spark. Vanessa's head turned sharply, her eyes narrowing as she watched me step past the business class line and turn toward the first class entrance. I could feel her confusion without even looking directly at her. For years she had built a picture of me as small, simple, and unimportant. That picture was starting to crack. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was different. The seats were wide, the lighting soft, and the attendants greeted me by name. "Right this way, Mrs. Collins," one of them said, helping me place my bag in the overhead compartment. I settled into my seat, a glass of water placed beside me before I could even ask. I leaned back, allowing myself a small smile. It wasn't about luxury. I didn't care about champagne or reclining seats. What mattered was the truth. that the woman who had tried to make me feel lesser had no idea who she was talking down to. From where I sat, I could see through the curtain separating first class from business. Vanessa's face appeared for a brief moment, her expression a mixture of disbelief and irritation. She whispered something to Andrew, who glanced toward me but quickly looked away. He seemed torn, caught between pride in his mother and fear of his wife's anger. I imagined their conversation as they sat down. Vanessa demanding answers. Why didn't you tell me she was in first class? Did you upgrade her ticket without saying anything? And Andrew stammering, I didn't. I don't know how. Maybe the airline made a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. Years ago, when I was still working long hours as a teacher, I had taken the little savings I managed to set aside and invested in the airline. I believed in their future and wanted something secure for Andrew. I never flaunted it, never used it to show off. For me, it was about stability and legacy. But as the years passed and the investment grew, it quietly gave me a status that Vanessa never imagined. She assumed her designer clothes and business class seats placed her above me. The truth was, I had been flying first class for years, not out of vanity, but because it was a courtesy extended to shareholders like myself. As I sat there, the memory of Vanessa's words replayed in my head. You're used to simple comforts. You'll be fine back there. I thought about how small she wanted me to feel, how satisfied she was to see me left behind. But now the roles were reversed. She sat just a few feet away, restless in her plush business class seat, while I rested in quiet dignity at the front of the plane. An attendant stopped by again, smiling kindly. Would you like a glass of champagne, Mrs. Collins? I shook my head and replied softly, just tea, thank you. I didn't need extravagance. All I needed was the peace of knowing who I truly was. When the doors closed and the engines began to hum, I caught another glimpse of Vanessa through the curtain. Her eyes locked on mine for a moment. She looked furious, though she tried to hide it behind a forced smile. I gave her a polite nod, and then turned back to my book. That nod was the turning point. I didn't argue. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice or rub it in. I simply existed in the space she thought I could never occupy. And that quiet confidence spoke louder than any words I could have said. As the plane lifted off, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. Vanessa had always dismissed me as someone beneath her. But on that flight, the truth revealed itself without me needing to say a single thing. I had carried her insults in silence for too long, but now I finally had the dignity of letting actions speak for themselves. I wasn't the weak, simple woman she thought I was. I was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had built a life through sacrifice and smart choices. And for the first time, Vanessa was forced to see me for who I really was. The hum of the plane was steady. The lights dimmed to a soft glow as the flight attendants prepared for takeoff. I sat comfortably in my first-class seat, my hands resting on the armrests, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the galley. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace, but I also knew the peace was not shared by Vanessa. From my spot, I could see just beyond the curtain, separating first class from business. Vanessa leaned toward Andrew, her brows furrowed, her voice sharp. Even though I couldn't hear every word, her frustration was clear. She was demanding answers, pointing discreetly in my direction. Andrew, poor thing, looked uncomfortable. He ran his hand through his hair, glanced toward me, then shook his head as if to say, I don't know either. The tension was thick enough to feel across the cabin. Vanessa, who prided herself on always being in control, was suddenly faced with something she couldn't explain. For her, appearances were everything, and in that moment, the picture she tried to paint of herself as superior to me was falling apart in front of strangers on an airplane. After the plane leveled off in the sky, the flight attendants began moving through the aisles with drinks and warm towels. One of them, a young woman with a kind smile, stopped at my seat. Mrs. Collins, it's lovely to see you again. Would you like the usual? I smiled back and said, just tea, please. Her words carried easily into the row behind the curtain. I didn't need to look to know Vanessa had heard. The way the attendants spoke to me, the familiarity, the respect. It was the opposite of how Vanessa treated me. And it was all happening in public, where her arrogance had no shield. Not long after, Vanessa stood up from her seat in business class. She smoothed her expensive blouse, plastered a smile on her face, and stepped through the curtain. "Mother," she said loudly, her tone dripping with forced sweetness. "What are you doing up here?" I looked up from my book, keeping my voice calm. "I'm sitting in my seat." Her smile twitched, struggling to hold steady. "But this is first class. Your ticket was economy. Did someone make a mistake?" Before I could answer, the flight attendant returned with my tea. She placed it on the tray table and said warmly, "Mrs. Collins, if there's anything else you need, just let me know." Then she walked away without acknowledging Vanessa at all. The color drained slightly from Vanessa's face. She glanced around, noticing other passengers watching. Some of them were curious, some amused. She lowered her voice, but leaned closer. "How is this possible? Did Andrew upgrade you without telling me?" I held her gaze and spoke softly, but firmly. "No, Vanessa. This isn't Andrew's doing. It's mine. Years ago, I invested in this airline. I've been a shareholder ever since. Whenever I fly, first class is where I belong." For a second, she froze. The words seemed to hang in the air. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She had no quick remark, no clever insult. She had spent years trying to make me feel small, and in one simple truth, that power disappeared. Finally, she whispered, her voice trembling with anger, "You should have told me." I tilted my head slightly and replied, "Why would I need to? My worth doesn't depend on your approval." She blinked rapidly, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the rage boiling beneath her polished exterior, but she couldn't unleash it here. Not in front of all these strangers. Not with attendants treating me like a valued guest while she sat behind me, no longer the most important woman in the room. Andrew appeared behind her, his face red, his voice low. "Vanessa, come back to our seats," he murmured. He gave me a quick, apologetic glance, as if silently acknowledging everything he hadn't defended me from before. Reluctantly, Vanessa turned and walked back, her heels clicking against the floor. Her shoulders were stiff, her pride wounded. For the rest of the flight, she didn't say a word to me. She sat in business class, fuming in silence, while I sipped my tea in peace. It wasn't the champagne or the luxury of the seat that made me feel victorious. It was the quiet dignity of that moment. For years, I had carried her remarks without response. For years, I had let her believe she was above me. But here, on this plane, the truth revealed itself naturally. I didn't need to shout or prove myself. I simply had to be who I was, and let her see the difference. As the flight continued, I thought about my husband, about the sacrifices we made, and about the values I tried to instill in Andrew. Hard work, humility, and planning for the future had given me strength. Vanessa had only appearances, and appearances fade quickly when faced with truth. When we landed hours later, passengers began gathering their things. Vanessa avoided my eyes. Andrew helped Emily with her bag, and when he looked at me, there was a flicker of respect I hadn't seen in a long time. He knew, even if he didn't say it, that his mother wasn't the fragile woman Vanessa tried to paint. I walked off the plane with my head held high, not because of money or status, but because I had finally reclaimed my dignity. When the plane touched down and the wheels screeched against the runway, I felt a strange mix of relief and calm. The journey, that had begun with humiliation, ended with dignity. I gathered my bags slowly, letting the other passengers rush past me. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I had already won a quiet battle, one that didn't need shouting or gloating. As we exited the plane, I noticed Vanessa walking briskly ahead, her posture stiff, her face carefully blank. She didn't look back at me once. It was clear she was still burning with anger, though she tried to hide it. For a woman who loved appearances, nothing was worse than being exposed in front of strangers. She had wanted to show the world that I was small and simple, but instead, she had revealed her own pettiness. Andrew, on the other hand, slowed his pace and walked beside me. He didn't say much, but the look in his eyes said what words could not. There was apology there, and maybe even admiration. For so long he had stayed quiet, letting his wife's words weigh me down, perhaps because it was easier than standing up to her. But after that flight, he finally saw that silence is not always kindness. It can also be a wound. Emily, sweet and innocent, skipped to my side and held my hand. "Grandma," she said with a big smile, "your seat was so fancy. Daddy told me you're really important to the plane." Her words made me laugh softly, and I squeezed her hand. "No, sweetheart," I said. "The plane isn't what makes me important. It's the people we love that matter most." Over the next few days, Vanessa avoided me. She kept her conversations short, her tone clipped, and her eyes filled with resentment. I didn't mind. I had no desire to argue with her, or prove anything further. Life has a way of teaching lessons on its own. She could either learn from it or stay bitter. But that choice was hers. For me, the trip became less about the destination and more about what it represented. Every meal, every walk with Emily, every quiet conversation with Andrew reminded me of the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not one of money or status, but of love, resilience, and dignity. In quiet moments, I thought back to my husband. He had always believed in planning for the future, even when times were hard. It was his encouragement that pushed me to make that small investment years ago, the one that eventually grew into something much larger. Sitting in first class wasn't about luxury. It was about honoring his belief in me, about showing that his trust hadn't been wasted. I realized then that the real inheritance I wanted to pass down wasn't my shares in an airline. It was the knowledge that no one else defines your worth. Not a cruel remark, not a dismissive smile, not even the silence of someone you love. True worth comes from the life you build, the sacrifices you make, and the love you give. Vanessa may never respect me, but respect was never hers to give. It was mine to claim by living with integrity. That was the lesson I carried with me, and the one I wanted Emily to grow up knowing. When we returned home, Andrew visited me alone a few days later. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once stayed up late grading papers while he finished his homework. He looked at me, his voice quiet but steady. "Mom," he said, "I should have defended you. I let Vanessa's words go too far. I'm sorry I reached across the table and took his hand. Andrew, you don't need to apologize. You saw the truth when it mattered, and that's enough. What matters now is teaching Emily how to value people for who they are, not for what they have." He nodded, tears in his eyes. That moment meant more to me than any seat on any airplane. My son finally understood. Looking back, I know I'll never forget the sting of Vanessa's words at the airport, but I'll also never forget the quiet strength I found in myself on that flight. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living with dignity, letting the truth shine without saying a word. So when I think about what happened, I don't feel bitterness. I feel gratitude. Gratitude that my husband's wisdom carried me through. Gratitude that my son opened his eyes. And gratitude that my granddaughter will grow up seeing that worth is not measured by where you sit on a plane, but by how you carry yourself through life. And to anyone who has ever been made to feel small, remember this: your value is not in someone else's opinion of you. Your value is in the love you give, the sacrifices you make, and the life you live with integrity. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story too.